On behalf of Global Trust Partners, I want to encourage you to the Emerging and Established Steward webinar series. Today is 23 March 2023. On this webinar, we aim to empower board treasurers to address pressuring issues they face in their church and ministry service. I am Irini Munir, serving as Vice President of Training and Empowerment from Egypt. I also serve as board member of Nakun Ministry. Today, joining me are three special guests: Matthew Gatson, GTP CFO and Strategy Catalyst from Australia; Sonia Daniel, Associate Director, Evangelical Financial Accountability Council, IFAC from India, and GTP Regional Facilitator for South Asia; and Mark Whitsett, Investment Portfolio Manager from USA and GTP Board Member and Treasurer. Before we begin, let me put this webinar in context. In 2022, GTP sent a detailed survey to our global network. 264 stewards from 54 countries responded. They represented more than 50 sectors in church and Christian ministry. 52% of the respondents said they had 0 to 5 years of experience in their roles. We call them emerging stewards. 48 of the correspondents said they had more than 5 years of experience in their roles. We call them established stewards. What unites all of them is that they want help to play their part in addressing pressuring issues and helping ministries follow standards to flourish. So we designed this 12-part webinar series with a board series in March, a C-suite series in April, a church series in May, and an officer series in June. Each webinar is free, lasts 60 minutes, and start at 11 a.m. GMT. Invite others to register to attend or watch recordings of prior webinars at gtp.org/events. Let's look at an overview of today's webinar. It has 7 parts. In part 1, Matthew will explore the question: what are the top 3 pressuring issues for board treasurers from a biblical perspective? In part 2, Sonia will consider the question: why approach pressuring issues from a biblical, faithful, globally consistent, and locally contextualized perspective? In part 3, I will move the conversation to a practical level, answering the question: how can board treasurer apply tools to address pressuring issues? In part 4, Mark will help us envision what if you apply this teaching and use these tools. Then part 5 is your time. At GTP, we have learned that the more people talk about a topic, the more people learn. So we will have a breakout discussion with random groups of 3 Christian workers around the world. During this time, we will ask established stewards with more than 5 years of experience to share an example or story that illustrate a point of today's webinar. In the discussion time, we will encourage emerging stewards with 0 to 5 years of experience to share on one biblical insight or practical idea they gained from this webinar. This will be a great time of peer learning. And then in part 6, we will have a question and answer and final comments from the panelists. Finally, in part 7, I will wrap us up and point you to other webinars and recording. That's the overview. Now, let's begin with Matthew to address the what question.
Thanks, Renee. I'm Matthew Gadsden, CFO and Strategy Catalyst for GTP, and I live in Australia. I'm going to tackle the what question. What are the top 3 pressing issues for board treasurers? And what does the Bible say about these issues? Our research surfaced that one of the things board treasurers want to know about is personal and spiritual health and professional development. Now, where do we look in the scripture for this? In other words, what should be a picture for treasurers as they serve in their organization or church or ministry? We find inspiration from the Counsel of Solomon. The biblical text in view is Proverbs 27, 23 to 27. In this text, we see it begins with the expression, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks." This idea of being sure you know the condition implies that some of the flock might be young, some might be middle-aged, and some might be older. Some might be good at providing milk, some might provide wool, some might provide meat. The idea here is that our assets are in different stages of their life cycle. Knowing the condition and stage of the assets in their life cycle even brings into a view and an understanding of depreciation. Our assets sometimes are producing income and sometimes are not. So let's recap the first thing what a treasurer needs to understand. It's how to be sure you know not just the number, but the condition of your flock. Now, you need to understand your role as a steward and how to manage the assets of the group for the good of the flock. This is only the beginning of what you want to do. You want to continue to give careful attention to your herds. For riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. Think of it this way. The text is saying you might be doing well now. You might have riches, and you might maybe be a strong organization. But if you don't manage your resources well you're going to have trouble quickly. The text continues to say that when the hay is removed and the new growth appears and the grass from the fields is gathered in, the lambs will provide you with clothing and the goats with the price of a field. In other words, if you're not only looking at the condition of your flocks, but giving careful attention to your herds, you'll get a much better realization that you have different kinds of assets. Some are producing, some have what we would call new growth, which means you're a ways away from harvest season. This brings into view that you need to attend to having adequate cash reserves until the assets maybe start producing or revenue streams generate revenue. The text concludes with this powerful idea of you'll have plenty of goat's milk to feed your family and to nourish your female servants. What comes into view there is this idea that if you're stewarding your assets well, you know their condition as well as you're giving attention to what you have and the different kind of assets you have, and you're stewarding this attentively, then you're going to position yourself and your ministry for sustainability and for flourishing. You'll not just care for your ministry, you'll care for your staff and volunteers. So the biblical answer we would offer this first pressing issue, it would be to simply follow the wisdom of Solomon and to make sure you know the condition of your flocks and to give careful attention to your herds. Practice these functions and you're going to ensure the ongoing of the organisation. Now, pressing issue number 2 moves to the lack of idea of the knowledge of the treasurer role. To help with this, we will paint a picture with at least 3 things treasurers need to focus on: monitoring finances, maintaining controls, and minding compliance. Let me elaborate under the idea of monitoring finances. 1 Timothy 3, 4 and 5 says that a requirement for someone who's going to steward or manage the resource of an organisation or God's house, the church, they need to be a good manager of their own house. In other words, they need to be good at monitoring finances in their own personal stewardship. Additionally, Luke 16, 1 and 2 says the master found out that the manager had been squandering his assets. In that text, he calls them into account. So a good treasurer needs to be able to call for regular and accurate reporting. In other words, to be attuned to what's going on with the CFO and the CEO. If you think of it in these terms, there might not be perfection within the organization, but you're going to be monitoring it. You're going to look at reports so that if there is a problem, you're going to be able to notice it and rectify it in a prompt and in an appropriate manner. Under maintaining controls, it's important to note that one facet relates to accountability and another relates to peer accreditation, which is holding each other accountable. For accountability, in Matthew 25:14-30, the master essentially says to the servant that he wants him to give an account for their stewardship. What have they done with the resources? Have they put them to work in keeping with the master's wishes? All financial accountability is demonstrating that we have faithfully put to work the resources of the Christian organization consistent with our mission. Where external accreditation comes into view is the Apostle Paul sitting in Ephesus, writing to the Corinthians over in Corinth, saying to them that he wanted them to have financial controls. He wanted them to be sure that multiple people were handling the money. This is what brings the treasurer's role in, that oversight was happening and that controls are in place. Working together to do this brings into view that we need to hold each other accountable with peer accreditation to make sure that we are doing what we're meant to be doing and be having the right controls in place to preserve God's honour. And the last area that a treasurer really needs to be keen at in minding compliance. In 2 Corinthians 8:20 and 21, we see that we have to take great pains in how we administrate God's resources. The reason we're going to take great pains is that we're doing hard work. And why are we doing this hard work? We've got to do what's right before God and before man. We've got to work to avoid fiscal irresponsibility before God. In other words, we represent him in our treasurer role of a church, or our treasurer role of a Christian ministry. We've got to also do what's right before man, which means we're going to ensure that we're filing government filings. In America, that would be that we're filing by November 15 each year the Form 990. So if you're out there and you're a board treasurer and you're wondering, what does the Bible say about my treasurer role? We believe you could put it in 3 categories. You need to monitor finances, maintain control, and mind compliance. For pressing issue number 3, let's roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty-gritty, or the details. Managing finance and audit committee work is hard work. There's probably no better biblical example than in Ezra 8:21-34 of an audit and detailed financial controls. If you're a treasurer, study this text. You'll see 4 key points emerge. The first one is that you need to protect people and resources with fasting and prayer. Let's just acknowledge together that our work as a board treasurer is not just financial work. It's deeply spiritual work. These are God's resources we're stewarding, and we want God's help. We set aside our desires and we fast. We really call out to him for his assistance with this. We also appoint trusted workers to handle God's money. If you look at that text in Ezra chapter 8, what you discover is that this picture that skilled people are put in place to oversee accounting of the resources. They're going to be moved from one location to another. Ezra is going to acknowledge that this was possible with the gracious hand of God. But it says that he sets apart 12 leading priests. So he identifies his team, and they're going to weigh out the articles of gold and silver, and then they're going to give an account for them. Then what's going to happen is they're going to implement controls and guard these consecrated gifts. In modern times, We might say not just with financial controls, but also with cyber awareness and controls. They're going to make sure that these consecrated gifts are well looked after. And that's what we steward now, consecrated gifts. By the way, if you're a treasurer, don't try to do the work alone. Do it with a committee of people. You want to protect the resources, commit to fasting and prayer, appoint trusted workers to handle God's work, and guard these gifts with controls and cyber care. Then, at the end of that Ezra text, literally after moving all these resources, they have independent auditors verify the accounting. In other words, they do the work of counting it all again. So it's beautiful in Ezra 8:34. Everything was accounted for by number and weight, and the entire way was recorded at that time. In other words, when you do as a treasurer the hard work, when you do the hard work of managing the finance and audit committee work, and you get to the end of the year, preparing for and going through a financial review or financial audit, all the numbers come together. It honors God. That's the role of a treasurer, to see that this giving account of the stewardship and is an inspiration for us to pursue stewardship with excellence. Now, I'd like to ask Sonia to address the why question.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for answering the what question. I'm Sonia Daniel, and I serve as the Associate Director of Evangelical Financial Accountability Council in India. And I'd like to address the question, why approach pressing issues from a biblically faithful, globally consistent, and locally contextualized perspective? I love answering the why question, as it aims to move us to think about our motivations and move us from our heads to our hearts. I want to start with the biblically faithful part. If we take a biblically faithful approach to these pressing issues, we will experience several benefits. Our board treasurer will, at the start, honor God with faithful financial stewardship. In other words, we do the biblical things that Matthew just outlined. We are going to honor God with faithful financial stewardship, and this is going to help the ministry function with adequate margin. I loved how he explained the biblical text from Proverbs that when we know the condition of our herds and flocks, we know when we have the revenue coming in, and we're not going to be missing payroll. We are going to be functioning with adequate margin, and a best practice in non-profit ministries is to have about 3 months of income on hand. As a treasurer, you're going to be able to provide a periodic financial snapshot to the governing board. Now, GTP has a great template for this and will be shared later. So, biblically speaking, you're going to be ready at your quarterly meetings or however often you meet to give a financial picture or a snapshot and give an accurate report. Now, this is also going to strengthen the staff in the practice of financial management, which means if the board treasurer is asking for this, the staff will grow in their ability to produce such reports. Also, your treasurer will do the hard work of working closely with the CFO to create a budget all the way to getting a clean audit. Now imagine the journey of creating a budget and then using it throughout the year and having the financial audit at the end of the year saying that things were managed with integrity. And so ultimately, if your board treasurer follows this biblically faithful approach, the board treasurer will be a faithful steward who builds trust through transparency and accountability. So at the end of the day, for biblically faithful, we are going to grow stewards. Now, next we'll address is the globally consistent, which is if we follow globally consistent patterns of excellence, we are going to follow standards. And our board treasurer, if he takes a globally consistent approach to these pressing issues, let's see the numerous benefits he will experience. Our board treasurer will improve financial management in churches and ministries. In other words, you're going to see not only one church or ministry flourish, but if we are globally consistent, we are going to see financial management across the boards improve. And we are going to discern and share best practices for board treasurers. I love how multiple ministries in India are flourishing, and we want to see this around the world. 3. We're going to strengthen the reputation of God's work worldwide if we follow the standards together. So, what happens is that when we comply with laws, when we do what's right before man, and the other scripture that Matthew mentioned is that when we reflect the higher standard, we'll do what's right before God. And so the idea of being globally consistent was the vision Paul had when he was writing to the people of different nations in Second Corinthians, calling them to do the same thing in Galatia, the same thing in Corinth, to honor God. And this positions God's work around the world for fruitful and sustainable outcomes. And so this brings us to what it means to be locally contextualized. If you take a locally contextualized approach to these pressing issues, the benefits we'll experience are many. In other words, if you follow this biblical pattern, what will your board treasurer look like on the local level? The answer is one that sets a fiscal example for other churches and ministries. In other words, if you do the things as are mentioned in the biblical text, you're not only going to help your church flourish, but people are going to look at your church and ministry and they're going to say, I want to do what you're doing. So you're going to contribute not only to the sustainability of your church, but also to the sustainability of the ministry where you live and flourish. You'll comply with local laws and regulatory requirements. In other words, because your board treasurer is making sure that you're doing right in front of God and man, you'll comply with those laws and requirements. And we have a lot of them in India. We have what we call the FCRA, which is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. And we have many other different filings and statutory compliances that needs to be complied to. And so if your board treasurer is applying those biblical teachings on a local level, you're not only going to comply with the laws, but you will also engage with local experts for service in churches and ministries. You're going to get accountants and attorneys involved. You're going to have a team, as we heard the board finance and audit committee, for working together to ensure the ongoing health of the ministry and the mission. And so imagine that the board treasurer is not working alone, but building a team that will ensure this. Now, I'm excited as I provide leadership to a peer accountability group in India that on a local level, what a treasurer would do is to really facilitate an annual peer accreditation. And the treasurer will make sure that we are annually demonstrating our faithful administration and financial stewardship, and that we are a part of the peer accountability group where we are accredited for following the standards of faithfulness. Lastly, we're going to keep accurate financial records. So this will ultimately ensure the sustainability of the church or ministry because they're going to do the things which biblically outlines their role. They are doing it with excellence and in a God honoring way that's going to result in accurate records and sustainability. With this, I'd like to turn back to Erin to address the how question.
Thanks, Sonia and Matthew, for this great input coming from your experience. As we love to get practical at GTP, I will take us from our heads and heart to equipping our hands with tools. I will address the question, how can board treasurer apply practical tools to address pressuring issues? Well, the first thing we want to encourage you to do at GTP, because we believe you're God's ordained board treasurer for your organization, is do GTP diagnostic tool for your organization. It means you have 36 questions and some of them are financial related. You get your personalized, customized diagnostic report, which points you to download the free GTP templates, and then you put your house in order. And by putting your house in order, you practically implement what was articulated in this biblical teaching today. This diagnostic tool available at present in 5 languages, English, Spanish, French, Czech, Solvac at www.gtp.org/resources/diagnostic tool. Let's go to the templates. In the featured templates, I want to highlight today our first and foremost template, a travel expense policy. At the first ever GTP board meeting, a travel and expense policy was mapped out so that the founding CEO had limits to how he could spend resources and how he had to give an account for those resources. The purpose of this policy is to ensure that adequate cost control are in place. Travel and other expenditure are appropriate. And also to provide a uniform and consistent approach for the timely reimbursement of authorized expenses incurred by personnel. Second one is for spending plan, or many call it as a budget. At GTP, we like to call this template spending plan, because in biblical text, when the master calls for an account, he wants to make sure they have been spending and deploying God's resources in keeping with his wishes, to make sure you are on track, you are on task, and on mission. So you need to have a spending plan in place that is mapped out before the fiscal year begins. This guides the stewardship of resources during the year. And how we believe God wants us to spend these resources and then serve to give structure for reporting throughout the year. And this will prepare you for a good audit at the end of the year. Let's go to another template. This is really important to have because it's called a commitment authority policy. It essentially outlines who has the authority to spend and spend what. As a way of accountability, to be exposed to spend large amount of money. This is huge. And it's intended to limit this authority to the fewest people while still enabling efficient operations. So it is related to different levels of resources within the organization, CEO, CFO, or others. And so who has the authority to make these decisions? Need to be outlined on the board levels and with certain limitations to each amount. So your board treasurer is going to make sure you have a travel expense policy, a spending plan and commitment authority policy. So these three will help you to be sure resources are handled properly, because it's God's resources and God's ministry. Lastly, it is the financial snapshot, and I love this one most of all. Our board treasurer actually helped create it. It's a one-page document that maps your financial position based on the last quarter. The forecast looking at the next quarter shows the revenues, expenses, and then demonstrate how they're being invested and spent on 4 programs of GTP. It helps you easily to adapt for your organization. And it's a great template to apply the teaching you have here in today's webinar. Now, I would like to pivot to Mark to address what if question.
Thank you, Irene, and hello, everyone. My name is Mark Whitsitt, and I live in the United States, and I've been serving as the board treasurer for GTP since the beginning. And I want to address the question, what if? What if you applied this teaching and used these tools? I really appreciate the teaching and experience and information that Matthew and Sonia have relayed, as well as the practical tools that Irene just highlighted. And one of the things that really resonates to me from this webinar is how the heart and the head are important in combination to effectively apply faithful standards of stewardship. When I first started as treasurer at GTP, I didn't have a lot of the experience in a treasurer role, particularly for a newly formed organization like GTP. but I had the heart and I was willing to serve. And when the CEO contacted me about his vision to launch and to establish GTP, I said, how can I serve? And fortunately, what was really helpful to me was there were established stewards already working with GTP on the founding board that really were able to speak into my life and impart the knowledge. Our CEO imparted the biblical teaching and principles, many of which you heard today, that laid the groundwork in which our policies and procedures could grow out of. And one of the other founding board members had extensive experience in the area of finance and accounting and was a huge resource to me, particularly in the earlier years, as I could approach him with questions and gain wisdom and insight from a practical perspective. And so having that combination of heart and knowledge with the combined practical tools adapted to your organization are hugely valuable in ensuring the sustainability and financial stewardship of your organization. One of the things we realized early on was the importance of establishing policies and procedures and proper reporting. You've heard about some of these policies and templates that we created, and these were created over time as we sought to ensure that the mission of GTP was being stewarded appropriately and that financial resources were being aligned with what God has asked us to do. I can attest that these resources established early on laid the foundation and positioned GTP to steward the resources that God would provide over time effectively and efficiently. And it made the role as treasurer for me enjoyable, peaceful, and really enriching, because once these policies and procedures were in place, it really gave us a solid foundation that we could apply consistently from quarter to quarter, year to year, without having to rethink and recreate our direction every single year. For example, the spending plan that Irene mentioned, this ensures that before the year begins, you and the staff and your committee of stewards around you go to God and seek God's direction in how he would like you to spend his resources for the future year. One of the things that I love about our spending plan, and if you download this, you'll see, is that we align each expenditure to our programs that are designed to fulfill our mission. So for example, at GTP, we have 4 programs: teaching, training, toolbox, and teamwork, that are directly aligned with accomplishing our mission. And each expenditure within our plan are mapped to those 4 programs. That ensures that we are allocating adequate resources to each program, and will also highlight in cases where maybe inadequate resources are being planned, and we can adjust for those at the beginning of the year. The financial snapshot, as Irene mentioned, is also a very important tool. Not only does this provide transparency and accountability throughout the year, because it looks both back in the previous quarter as to what actual expenditures were made and how they were aligned with the program, but in each financial snapshot, it also gives the board members a preview into the next quarter of how we intend to spend money and how they align with each of our programs. So tools like this are very important, not just from a monitoring perspective, but also from a mission alignment perspective. And it was really important to me early on was to be able to see how our expenditures, how our use of resources were aligned with our mission, and to be able to report on that on a consistent, routine basis so that we could transparently demonstrate to the board and to our constituents how we are doing and how we're managing our resources in accordance with our mission. One other thing I want to highlight is that you don't have to do this all at once. If you're a newer organization and you're just starting out and creating these policies, don't feel like you have to implement them day one. Take your time. Take your time to apply these biblical principles and to seek God's heart into how you want to design and implement and adapt the policies to your particular mission and to your particular context, and then implement them over time so that they're done in a manner that is manageable and actionable. When we first started out at GTP and started designing these templates, we had a limited ability to run fast enough to engage and report on these items all together at once. And so the CEO over time implemented one or two policies in a very methodical manner, such that the staff and the board and the organization could rally around each of those and get a good understanding and have them ingrained before we moved on to the next. So as you step back and think, how can I ensure sustainability and faithful service in the area of finances? I really encourage you to explore the templates that are out there. Take advantage of that diagnostic tool that Irene mentioned, which will highlight some areas that you might want to work on either now or down the road, and really leverage the people around you and the resources available to you so that you can learn from those who have gone before and apply the wisdom and the insight and the practical tools that people have benefited from over time. One last thing that I would like to say is that when my board term ends, I will be stepping out of this current role and allowing someone else to take over and enjoy the benefits of the treasurer role. But I can do that with utmost confidence that we have established the proper controls, the proper systems, the proper policies, and have a good groundwork that the next person who follows after me can really thrive in that role. I'm thankful that we're surrounded by established stewards that can speak into the lives of emerging stewards, just like someone spoke into my life when I first started. We have a finance and audit committee that is that has people from around the world with different experiences, different ages, different levels of stewardship experience, all working together to impart wisdom and to help the next generation and the younger folks really grab hold of these biblical principles and carry the torch forward. And so if you're like me and you are approaching a time of transition and you're an established steward, I really encourage you to be intentional about speaking into the staff or the other board members or other partners within your organization. Speak into their lives, help to enforce these principles, help to give them tools and practical areas that they can leverage and really thrive in their role. This will ensure the continual sustainability of the organization and will also bring glory to God and be example to other organizations in the communities around us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Now, it's your turn to explore the idea shared today. Remember, at GTP, we say the more people talk, the more people learn. So it's time for peer learning together. In a moment, we will send you to a random breakout groups of 3 stewards for 8 minutes. Manage your time so everyone gets a chance to speak. When you get to your group, identify yourself by sharing your name, your ministry, and whether you are an emerging steward with 0 to 5 years of experience or an established steward with more than 5 years experience. For established steward with more than 5 years of experience, we ask you to share an example that illustrates a point of today's webinar. For emerging stewards with less than 5 years of experience, we ask you to share one biblical insight or practical idea you gained from this webinar. I hope you enjoyed the interaction with fellow stewards. Now, we want to hear from each panelist one more time. Let's start with Matthew. Matthew, thanks so much for the biblical material you shared. In your service, you have worked with board treasurer. What are the little things which the treasurer have done to help you grow as an emerging steward?
Yeah, thanks, Renee. When it comes to doing the little things well, it's important to remember that these little things that we do are actually really big things. It's doing little things well that move up to the even bigger things happening. So it's really important that we get those little things done well the first time. And I can think of no better example than that of our very own GTP board treasurer. Having a board treasurer that actually has the availability to meet with you, is attentive to the needs of the organization, and isn't afraid to ask really good questions, not only really brings out the best of the ministry, but also really brings out the best in you as a steward, because getting you to really think about what needs to be happening, what you need to be reporting, and what you need to be accountable with. I'd even go as far as to say that having a really great treasurer can help with the processes of creating a budget or a spending plan, or even just having the creativity to come up with something like the financial snapshot. Just having a board treasurer that's really attuned and is following biblical principles really is going to draw out a new way of thinking as you in a steward.
Thanks so much, Matthew. This is really helpful, and it will help us also to start. Sonia, you see a lot of ministries with peer accreditation. While their situations and financial are confidential, what recurring challenges have you seen that emerging stewards will want to avoid?
Thanks, Irene, and that is a very pertinent question. The peer accountability groups have been formed with a vision to empower and equip the non-profit ministries to follow the standards of faithfulness, thereby ensuring that they adhere to the biblical values as well as to the laws of the land. EFAC, the PAG in India, exists to assist Christ-centered organizations through capacity building to maintain standards in their vision, mission, values, and strategies. Now, 2 Corinthians 8:21 says, "For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of man." The one primary challenge that we have observed is the acceptance of peer accountability groups by these ministries. I would say that the emerging stewards should acknowledge the peer accountability groups and also be receptive to the idea of accreditation. They need to understand that the peer accountability group is not a policing agency, but a support system, which will only help in strengthening the functioning of the overall ministry. Another thing is that the emerging stewards, as emerging stewards, one should ensure that there is no deviation from the budget, and they shouldn't wait for the board meetings to inform of any such deviation that might have occurred. Such instances should immediately be communicated openly and as and when required. Being members of the same team and working towards the same goal, your ability to work as a cohesive unit is a major key to success. And so, by following the standards of faithfulness and by being accredited, we are ensuring that we are doing what is right in the eyes of man and also in the eyes of God. I do hope this answers your question, Erin.
This is really great. I love your keen insight about peer accountability group and what is the purpose of this accreditation. Mark?
Time. And I can think of no better example than that of our very own GTP board treasurer. Having a board treasurer that actually has the availability to meet with you, is attentive to the needs of the organization, and isn't afraid to ask really good questions, not only really brings out the best of the ministry, but also really brings out the best in you as a steward, because getting you to really think about what needs to be happening, what you need to be reporting, and what you need to be accountable with. I'd even go as far as to say that having a really great treasurer can help with the processes of creating a budget or a spending plan, or even just having the creativity to come up with something like the financial snapshot. Just having a board treasurer that's really attuned and is following biblical principles really is going to draw out a new way of thinking as you in a steward.
Thanks so much, Matthew. This is really helpful, and It will help us also to start. Sonia, you see a lot of ministries with peer accreditation, right? While their situations and financial are confidential, what recurring challenges have you seen that emerging stewards will want to avoid?
Thanks, Irene, and that is a very pertinent question. The peer accountability groups have been formed with a vision to empower and equip the non-profit ministries to follow the standards of faithfulness, thereby ensuring that they adhere to the biblical values as well as to the laws of the land. EFAC, the PAG in India, exists to assist Christ-centered organizations through capacity building to maintain standards in their vision, mission, values, and strategies. Now, 2 Corinthians 8:21 says, "For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of man." The one primary challenge that we have observed is the acceptance of peer accountability groups by these ministries. I would say that the emerging stewards should acknowledge the peer accountability groups and also be receptive to the idea of accreditation. They need to understand that the peer accountability group is not a policing agency, but a support system, which will only help in strengthening the functioning of the overall ministry. Another thing is that the emerging stewards, as emerging stewards, one should ensure that there is no deviation from the budget, and they shouldn't wait for the board meetings to inform of any such deviation that might have occurred. Such instances should immediately be communicated openly and as and when required. Being members of the same team and working towards the same goal, the ability to work as a cohesive unit is a major key to success. And so by following the standards of faithfulness and by being accredited, we are ensuring that we are doing what is right in the eyes of man and also in the eyes of God. I do hope this answers your question, Erin.
This is really great. I love your keen insight about peer accountability group and what is the purpose of this accreditation. Mark, it's been mentioned that the treasurer has a committee. At GTP, it's called FAC, Finance and Audit Committee. Talk about the committee and share how it takes shape as a group of emerging and established stewards working together.
Thank you, Ramini. One of the things I want to stress is that it's very important that as a treasurer, you don't have to feel like you have to do this alone. You have people that have gone before you, people that are maybe less experienced than you, but people that can come around you with a servant heart that can help carry the load of ensuring the sustainability and financial stewardship of the organization. You don't have to do this alone. And I'm really thankful for the folks at GTP that are part of the board, as well as the staff, because it really is a collaborative effort amongst board members and the staff members working together, ensuring transparency with each other and ensuring accountability so that we're operating at the highest level of standards in accordance with God's plan. The purpose of the FAC, or the Finance and Audit Committee, is really to develop and recommend to the board the financial principles, the plans, and courses of action that provide for the mission of the organization. And we have at GTP, we have 3 members on the Finance Committee that are also board members. Each member has a varying degree of experience with finances. We meet at least on a quarterly basis, sometimes more frequently as events emerge. But we also include the staff member, like the CFO, for example, and the CEO in our meetings because we want that connectivity with the organization and that real-time transparency and understanding what is happening at various levels of the organization. And so it's really important that from a connectivity perspective, from an accountability perspective, that you are meeting together, not just with fellow board members, but also with the staff, because there is a lot of exchange of information. There's also a personal relationship that can develop that establishes trust and accountability there. And so we've really been intentional about meeting consistently, making sure that we have the right stewards on the committee as well as incorporating the staff. And that's been a real support to me as treasurer, and really a sharing of the burden or sharing of the load to oversee the financial administration of the organization.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's really helpful. And I love your word about we work together, we make a difference. And this is what I see at GTP. And this is what I pray for each organization everywhere. I want to share at the end about my board service as an emerging steward in our ministries. And what happens when someone is not doing the hard work of the board treasurer? It turns to be like a mess in many aspects, on the personal and organizational level. There was a moment that the staff had no salary because we didn't put the right budget from the beginning, and because there was no limit during the year for our expenditures. Sadly, the organization was a big risk down because of resources and accountability. So how such financial crisis could be avoided if we are from the beginning have the right policies and templates, like the spending budget plan, the committee authority policy, like to be real stewards to God's resources and to set the right expectations following some of these GTP templates. Thanks everyone for this great insight. As we wrap up, we hope this webinar has empowered you to think biblically and act practically to address pressing issues in your role. This has been webinar number 3 of 12 in the Emerging and Established Stewards webinar series. It's also been number 3 of 4 in the webinar series. Please visit gtp.org/events to register for future webinars and to watch past recordings. Thanks again to our panelists and participants for making this a great webinar. I will ask Mark to close our time in a word of prayer, praying for the board treasurer around the world.
Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are the provider of resources and we are the stewards. We thank you that you have provided wisdom today through your word. We thank you for the collaboration of faithful stewards around the world and within each of our organizations. And I thank you for those who are watching today or watching the recording in the future. I pray, Lord, that you would continue to impart wisdom, continue to help us to grow in the area of financial stewardship, to be faithful in our service to you, and to do so that we can be a light to the world around us. We acknowledge, Father, that you are the provider and you are the caretaker and giver of all that we have. And so we just pray that you would continue to cultivate within each of our hearts a desire to follow these principles and to walk out in faithful service to you, and to train up others that can come alongside of us and behind us to carry the torch and continue the good work that you have done. And so we thank you for this time, and we ask that you would continue to impress upon our hearts these principles. In Jesus' name, amen.